Welcome back to our discussion, Implications of AI and ML-based modernization efforts, sponsored by LMI here on Federal News Network. My guest today is Josh Wilson, Senior Vice President of Service Lines and Technology at LMI. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And we were talking about the JAKE, the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, before the break. And you described a lot of processes that they have learned to do to bring AI into some kind of operational level. But implied in a lot of what you said is for this to happen across DoD so that each unit, the armed services and the other fourth estate agencies can develop their own AI capabilities. There's a cultural change and a different type of person maybe needed to be added or retrained in here. So how does the JAKE learning get inculcated across DoD as time goes on?
Well, I think, as you think about what we're trying to accomplish, this is true what digital transformation, right? So a lot of people think when they think of, enhancing things or modernizing things, we think of it almost like traditional, continuous process improvement, right? Our Lean Six Sigma days of how do I take steps out of this existing process, right? Well, what we're talking about here is literally not existing processes. It's literally transforming how we do business, right? That's what these innovations and technologies are allowing us to do. And that creates a huge change management approach, right? Because it's going to require people to do jobs that are completely different than what they do today. It's not about making their job necessarily, in a lot of cases, more efficient. It's about transforming it completely, where some jobs go away and some jobs come on. And that fortunately or unfortunately plays to a lot of folks' insecurities, right? Which we then have to account for as you roll these things out. If you don't account for it, it just doesn't work, right? It fails. And what we talk about with our customers all the time is the antibodies will rise, right? And they'll attack you from within. So that's the one thing, is just being able to recognize that it's not just about the technology, it's about the organizational psychology, and it's about the change management approaches to a lot of this. And if you're not ready to pay for that, along with the digital innovations and investments in that space, you're probably not ready to be successful. That's point one I would make. And then, on the believability, explainability front, another cultural implication is, imagine, a lot, the Army and General Daly and others and the Air Force out of the Rapid Sustainability Office. Everyone is making big bets on predictive maintenance, right? Aircraft, before the aircraft lands, parts are waiting based off what we're learning from sensor data and enhanced reliability centered maintenance. And we're going to put those parts on there, and we're going to order parts automatically. Humans are going to be less in the loop in regards to a lot of those decisions. But imagine, you're that lieutenant colonel who has an annual maintenance budget of X, right? And all of a sudden this algorithm tells you to go spend 30 million on 3 parts. That's tough, right? Even though it may be the right decision or not, that's tough. So really helping people understand when to believe these things is going to be critical to support the pace at which we want to move, right? So believability, explainability, if you're not prepared to invest in that, and the education at the front line for folks that are going to have to believe what these things are telling them, right? Because it's their lives and their reputation on the ground, then you're probably not ready to be successful in this space from a cultural standpoint.
And that gets back to something you said about the JAKE earlier, and that is they started out with small wins to kind of prove and demonstrate that this was all possible. So at the non-JAKE or the DoD agency level, then it sounds like a big challenge is choosing the right use cases in the first place that can be done, that can be efficiently done, that maybe don't boil the ocean, but yet can show to people, look how this can work.
Yeah, one thing that I'm proud of in regards to what we do is when a customer comes up, we often get we want AI or ML, and so AI or ML is an approach. It's not a solution. It's not a problem statement, right? So you want AI, and what are you actually trying to accomplish, right? What problem are you actually trying to solve? AI ML may be the answer. I would tell you in a lot of cases where traditional modeling and sim is still hugely valuable to the what if questions that a lot of our customers are trying to ask. And and probably don't get enough credit for the value that they still generate.
Or,
But
or for that case, automation, for example, robotic process
yeah,
automation would be the answer.
no, Tom, that's a great point, right? So that, depending on the question you're trying to solve or answer, right? Let's start there. And one of the things that I'm proud of is we spend a lot of time just helping you understand what problems are actually tractable, right? What problems are actually solvable with AI and ML, or you're going to have to use other approaches, or you're going to have to go spend some time collecting data in a different way. There's been a lot of money spent on exercises that were never going to generate value just based off the maturity of the data you collect today and the quality of it. So something we really get focused on is we don't want to go in and you'll lose faith right away if we say, yeah, sure, we do it. And then it never achieves the effectiveness rates you need to support your mission. So you got to start there, and we always do.
And another challenge is the buy-in from people whose data you might need, but you didn't generate it. The data governance issue, more than governance, it's the data culture, data hugging issue. That's one that I think they probably have to overcome, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, for RDAP, as an example, they're using a lot of data that are owned by a lot of different data stewards, right? And when I say own, that we're trying to not use the word own with a lot of our customers, because you don't own it. The Army does in their case, right? Or OSD does, or whoever does, right? But you are the steward of that data. And that must be respected, because candidly, you want to push stewardship of data down as low as possible to the people that understand the business processes that are creating that data the best, right? But the magic sauce, if you will, is allowing them to be the stewards of this data and to feel comfortable with how that data is being used by others, right? So that it actually is being used in a way that they know will generate the results you're looking for, and also not give you results that don't represent reality. So there's a lot of new technologies out there that allow you to do that. And there's a lot of technologies out there that allow these data stewards to perform their role, right? Calibra is a great company that we've worked with a lot, that is getting a lot of traction in OSD, because they really scale that data steward role of managing the data standards, managing the data models. What is this data used for? Who is the owner of that data? And then there's other cool tools out there that we're using, like a Muta, right? Who Army Inscom is now looking at and digging into really well, that really allows you to manage access to that data in a very audible way, without encroaching on the data steward's role with how that data is curated and managed, and et cetera, right? So not to highlight these technologies as the one all be all, but my point is technology is no longer the problem, right? There are solutions out there that will allow you to deal with this, to where you can be the steward, you can have all the controls you want. There's no excuse not to make your data available to the enterprise to generate value from.
It sounds like this is where the chief data officer function can really come to the fore to help adjudicate a lot of this, and to maybe bring best practices in data stewardship, so that everybody's playing fair, and yet nobody feels like they're being taken advantage of because of the data they generate.
Yeah, I think that's true. But in the federal government, you know, things get driven by people who own budgets, right? So it's an incredible step forward for a lot of these chief data officers that are now in place. And the ones that have been most successful, I would tell you, are the ones that are incredibly good at effective advocacy, going out and advocating for why we should go and do things. I do think as we move forward, you're going to see the next phase of maturity from these chief analytic and chief data officers, right? Where their budgets are going to be more substantial, right? They're going to be able to drive more points of view beyond just, and that won't just be reliant on their ability to effectively advocate from the folks that do have the funds and do have the resources, right? And I think that's the next phase of maturity that we're all excited to see. But regardless, that role has created clear points of view and clarity around requirements that we've never had before. And it was a great step forward. And hopefully we just see those empowered more through resourcing decisions.
And we've been talking a lot about life cycle costing and life cycle planning. And it seems that AI, once it becomes baked into what the DoD does, will become part of the life cycle planning. And it too, the algorithms, the data sets required, and the technologies may be applied in the whole complex from training to deployment might have to be part of the life cycle planning. So is it possible to get that discipline going such that you, once you're got a project and everybody's bought in and it's running great, it's going to have to change eventually also, isn't it?
Yeah, look, in every federal agency, there are folks whose job are to bring together the total budget of that agency, right? In the DoD, they call it, the services call it their palms, right? And then it rolls up to CAPE, and OSD CAPE looks at that and says, do I believe these numbers? Do I not? And we have all these formal processes on how we acquire weapon systems and look at the total cost of ownership of those weapon systems over time, as the DoD example. But every federal agency does this, right? And the reality is we would argue that a lot of federal agencies today aren't even equipped with the rubrics and mental models to look at AI enabled technologies and be able to project what that function is going to cost me over time into the future from a sustainment standpoint. And why would we be there, right? This is new, but it's certainly going to be a huge cost driver as we move forward. And we've been here before, though, right? When LMI was founded 60 years ago, a lot of the pressure for founding us was because the DoD was buying a lot of weapon systems and not really accounting for what the true life cycle cost was going to be over time. And Congress and the president were tired of these surprises, right? And so, just like we did back then, LMI is spending, a good amount of research and development dollars working with great institutions that are thinking about this problem, because we want to give the government the tools to be able to look at these things and say, this is going to cost quite a bit more than you're currently seeing and you're projecting over the next 30 years, because you're not accounting for this other thing that you're going to have to account for.
So 60 years later, in other words, to go back to your analogy of the child in the woods, the DoD is still plucking mushrooms off logs and popping them down the hatch.
Maybe, right? But just that, I would tell you today that organizations like CAPE and others have gotten a lot more mature in regards to their ability to say, are you sure? In regards to what you're saying, this thing is gonna cost me, just in the DoD alone. But we need them to be prepared and postured to have that same level of maturity for all these new weapon systems as we have to project, future cost. And candidly, we don't know the numbers yet, but I would say we're digging into it. And, but it would not surprise me if this was $100 billion problem.
Wow. Well, I wish we could go on for another hour, but we are up against the clock. I want to thank today's guest. Josh Wilson is the Senior Vice President of Service Lines and Technology at LMI. I'm Tom Temin. You've been listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search LMI.